Money now going to have to bring it across, and he does. Hempfield down by 2. Losing the basketball, picking it back up is Gordon. Now a 3 for Sowers! Count it!
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
And we welcome you into another edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast. Each and every week here on the Westmoreland Sports Network and on our YouTube channel, Sean Meyers, Jack Ridenour, back for another action-packed episode. And Jack, we got a lot to get to. I know I say this every week because it's always accurate. We're going to have the plays of the week. We're going to have our team of the week. It's the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions boys team. We already talked about the girls team earlier. Now we'll focus on the boys side. We'll have another trivia question and a look ahead at the week to come. But first, we'll begin with our starting 5, the biggest takeaways from this past week in Westmoreland County high school hoops. And a lot to get to. I want to begin on the girls side with a team that we've talked about so often winning games, the Norwood Knights. They have their first losing streak of the season. They lost a couple of games consecutively this week. Now, one non-conference, but a real litmus test against a great Upper St. Clair team. And then they had their first section loss at North Allegheny. So, really, I don't think it's panic time for Coach Brzezinski, but definitely notable to see how they respond from this.
Well, I think what really stands out from this game is what Coach Brzezinski said after the game. A lot of the things that they did, and that's the Norwood Knights, that they did incorrectly, were self-inflicted wounds, right? So you're thinking, okay, probably some ill-advised passes, playing maybe a little bit too rushed, playing too quick, or whatever it might be. They seem to be mistakes that can be easily fixed. It's a matter of getting them fixed at the right time. And, again, I think what's so surprising between those two losses is how they fell to North Allegheny with how well they played against North Allegheny earlier this year, beat them 53-32 in a very, I would say, commanding way. So I think that moving forward again, and I've mentioned this on the show before, I've mentioned on the podcast before, last year, this Norwood team kind of did the same thing, ran off with 10 straight section wins, and then they faltered towards the end of the season. Are we going to see deja vu? I think this is kind of where Coach Brzezinski's got to challenge his team and say, hey, listen, where do we want to go from here?
Well, the good news is they did bounce back, defeating Bethel Park. Now, the Blackhawks, not nearly the same caliber of USC or North Allegheny. But I think what this does is maybe takes a little bit of pressure off of Norwin down the stretch. Because, yeah, they do need to respond. But I don't know that they're necessarily going to be the favorite now heading into the 6A playoffs, because you say North Allegheny's always in that conversation, and they knocked off Hempfield area in their knocked off Norwood in the more recent meeting. And then I think you also look at Upper St. Clair, and the Panthers have been spectacular. Now they're in the other section, so those two teams don't battle for section supremacy. But I think it's now maybe a 3-team mix as opposed to everyone having their targets on Norwood heading into the postseason.
And that could very well play into the hands of the Knights. They can kind of ease up a little bit in terms of they don't have to worry about who's got like you said, a target on them and who is watching them. They don't have to watch their back so much. And they finish out the season against Butler, Hempfield, Pine Richland, and Seneca Valley. 2 games at home, 2 games on the road. We've seen them play against Seneca Valley, and we saw what they were able to do against them. But again, they still have to be able to finish out strong and carry this over into the playoffs. And I think, again, going into that game against, against NA, got to give a lot of credit to how they were able to battle back. I think that's another great sign that this Norwood team, if push comes to shove, they can run off on a fourth quarter run and fight their way back into it. Kendall Berger was instrumental in that fourth quarter run, scored 11 points of her 16 in that fourth quarter alone. So again, for other teams that are out there that are watching how this Norwood team plays, they have to know if we go up against Norwood, we cannot get comfortable.
Absolutely. Well, we go from a Norwood team that has been dominant all season long on the girls' side to a Hempfield area boys team that really has struggled. And yet I think what they have done recently is really competed against some of the better teams in 6A. And so although Hempfield area fell in overtime in heartbreaking fashion on Friday at home against Upper St. Clair, it was a game where they almost pulled off a stunner. And with Harry Sowers leading the way, this team, I think, if nothing else, certainly looks like a team that could play spoiler over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you bring that term up, Sean. I love that term spoiler because I definitely think that, this Spartans team, they kind of have that moxie about them where if they get hit in the mouth, they're going to swing back. And watching a little bit of that game against Upper St. Clair, Hempfield did not come out in the strongest of ways in that first half. It was kind of back and forth, and Harry Sowers wound up with 25 points, but he had to work really hard for those 25 points. They did not come easy. I know that in the first half, he was getting some really good looks. Those shots eventually started to fall for him. But talk about just a disappointing way for this game to end for the Spartans. Ultimately lose it on a charge call that just does not go in their way. They led by 1 in the final minute. They were up by 1. Harry Sowers hits a big 3 to put them up by 1, but ultimately not enough. And again, when you lose a game on a charge call, or that's kind of the ceiling factor, if you will, there's nothing more deflated.
It went to overtime because that basket did not count, wiped out by a charge. Flick actually sent that to both you and I. He was there broadcasting the game. You think it's a good call. My argument is that Biondi kind of sidestepped, and there was some contact, but he didn't really go through the chest of the defender. So I thought that could have been a play-on type of scenario, even though the defender was set.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because I've actually talked a lot about that with a lot of people off air, and kind of what is considered the charge when somebody is kind of avoiding that contact, right? Like you said, Biondi sidestepping, Euro stepping, if you will, not really going full force into the chest of the defender. But again, the defender, and I know that you have the charge circle that gets factored in, yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, I think that if a player is set and they beat the offensive player to the spot, the referees, I would say 7 out of 8 times, 8 out of 10 times, they're going to side with the defense.
Well, a team that, much like Hempfield area, has been on the wrong end of some outcomes recently is the Franklin Regional boys. But I think the reason for the Panthers setbacks is you look no further than they are not healthy right now. And I had a chance to see them firsthand Friday. They lost to a Penn Trafford team that had really been struggling. Cam Rao, Cooper Rankin, both out of that game. They missed their previous game as well. Those guys combined to average better than 32 points per game for a Panthers team that averages just about 54 per game. So you take out the majority of your offense, and as much as everyone likes to say next man up, it's not that easy. Both those guys, Rao and Rankin, have stepped up in a massive way this year. Now, Finn Hutchinson can still score it, and I know he's picked up some of the burden, but the real question is, will they get those players back? If they do, will it be too late? Because now I think you look at this section, you say, you can't pencil Franklin Regional into anything necessarily.
No, and I think that is what's so alarming with just how well, especially Franklin Regional, started the season. I mean, I think it's kind of been a tale of 2 seasons right now, all in this 1 year for the Panthers. But like you said, it's the injury bug, right? I mean, you're getting hit with that at the worst time of the season when you've got 3, maybe 4 section games remaining, and it's getting to that push comes to shove. And, you know, again, Penn Trafford, they have struggled this year. There's no question about that. So a great win for a Penn Trafford team on Friday that I'm sure they're kind of like Hempfield, maybe looking to play spoiler. But now Franklin Regional says, we just lost in pretty definitive fashion to a team that has not been very good all year long. So now, again, I think Coach Reed, I saw something that he was quoted saying that he wants to get Rowell and Rankin back into the lineup a little bit and slowly but surely work them back in. But my question is, you know, obviously you want to make sure that they're healthy, but can you do it in a slow way? Can you kind of gradually work them back into it with time kind of ticking and the season running out right now?
Yeah, and so the reason why it's so significant, and when I talked to him Friday, he did not have a definitive time frame for either one of them. He said, you know, we're still waiting to hear. So right now they are at 3-3, and that's tied with Kiski area for 3rd place, but Greater Latrobe is 2-4. So the Wildcats are not far behind. Now, keep in mind, 4 teams guaranteed to get in, but Franklin Regional, if it finishes on a losing skid, I would say probably would be on the outside looking in. So they don't have a lot of time. They got off to that good start, but they did not create enough of a cushion that they could absorb, you know, basically 2 straight weeks of losing. So I think they have to figure out a way to right the ship again. It's going to be tough when you don't have your best players potentially available. We'll continue here with a story that I don't think many people expected coming into the season. That is the York Cougars girls team making a surprising run. And we talk about Franklin Regional playoffs, you know, still trying to solidify that spot. The York Cougars are sitting in a really good spot to get into the playoffs. That would be the first time in more than a dozen years for York to get in. It is a program that has really been down and out by and large, but things have turned around. Last year was a step forward. They have taken a massive second step forward this year, Jack.
Yeah, and to just give everybody the context of where this team has come and how well that they've been able to kind of, you know, pretty much do a full 180, if you will. Last 2 years, they've been able to win a combined 10 games. But in the 7 years before that, so from 2013 to 2020, they won a combined total of 11 games. So in the last 2 years, they win a total of 10. And in a 7-year span, they win a total of 11. So that kind of gives you an idea of where this team and where this program is trending. They've won 3 games in a row. They're looking for, like you said, their first playoff appearance since 2009, 2010. And not to mention, it was last year that they also had a winning record.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the records from past years. They have 9 wins this season already. They are 4-2, which is currently tied with South Park for second in Class 3A Section 4, behind only Waynesburg Central. And so when you see a turnaround like that, there's no doubt that the players are a big part, but you have to credit the coach, and that's Mike Girdich, who was there for a lot of the really tough seasons, but he stuck it out, and now he's starting to, see the fruits of his labor. And Laney Girdich has been a big part of that. So the Yawk Cougars girls team in a really, really good spot right now. You don't want to say anything for sure, but they just have to keep it up. And I think if more than anything else, Jack, those players who have gone through some rough seasons, they're starting to believe now, and that might be the last missing piece.
And I think what also is really exciting also is that there's a lot more participation at the younger levels, at the youth levels, for Yawk, especially at the elementary and the middle school levels. And I've been seeing a lot of things where you're starting to see a lot more players come out. They're starting to see more filled rosters. So as a result, I think that all of the players that, like you said, have gone through it over the last maybe 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years, they're now setting that example of what it looks like to really improve as a group. And now these younger players are starting to watch that, and they have that as kind of, maybe their expectation, if you will, of what it's like to be a winning program. So I think that the future is very bright for the Yawk Cougars girls basketball program.
We'll wrap up our starting 5 big takeaways with the Burrell Buccaneers boys. Is they had a successful week, couple of wins against a pair of Westmoreland County teams. And I looked at them as maybe a candidate for our team of the week over the last couple of weeks. Now, they've had a few losses mixed in, but no shame in losing against Shadyside Academy. That was just a 6-point loss. They lost against Woodland Hills in a tournament. Obviously, Woodland Hills is a larger school, but this team has been red hot basically since the Christmas break. And they're in a good spot right now, 7-2 in the conference. They're in third, but they're still in contention potentially to try to get first place in this section. Mike Fantuzzo has done a really nice job. Mackie Bennis always seems like he's putting up some big-time numbers for Burrell.
Well, Mackie Bennis was really the only player that they had returning this season. I think that is what's so incredible about this story for the Burrell boys, is that the expectations were not very high for this team, right? Like you said, I mean, Bennis was really the main piece for them coming back this year, but he has been tremendous. He's been upwards of 20 points a game, and reading a lot of articles about how he's been able to develop as a player. And, he kind of was mostly a shooter, mostly a perimeter threat, but he's been able to expand that game even further. He's been more of a driver lately. He's been more of a facilitator, getting into the lane, getting to the cup, whatever it might be. But I definitely have to say that they are in a perfect spot right now with the season winding down. Winners of 3 of their last 4, and they finish out with Deer Lakes, Apollo Ridge, and Valley. 3 teams that I think they could very well take down.
Yeah, that Deer Lakes one's going to be a big one. The Lancers at 7-1, Burrell's at 7-2. But the Buccaneers wins this past week against Dairy Area and Ligonier Valley, and that created a lot of separation between third place and potentially fourth place. So Burrell has done a nice job setting themselves up for good playoff positioning. That'll do it for our starting 5 takeaways, but we waste no time as we jump into our plays of the week. We talked about the Hempfield boys earlier. We'll continue with the Spartans. They ultimately lost in heartbreaking fashion, but Hempfield took the lead in the final minute of regulation against Upper St. Clair, courtesy of sharpshooter Harry Sowers, as called by Dan Flickinger and Roger Downs.
Hempfield able to get the ball in cleanly. Biani now going to have to bring it across, and he does. Hempfield down by 2. Losing the basketball, picking it back up is Gordon. Now a 3 for Sowers! Count it! 57-56, Hempfield with a 1-point lead. The chants of Harry echoing through Spartan Fieldhouse.
Jack, again, an incredible game that I don't think many people thought would be a competitive one, and that's what makes high school athletics so great. You can tell that Dan and Roger are all sorts of into that one. Tough for the Spartans, but Bill Swan has a lot to be proud about with that type of performance.
Yeah, no question. I think he's got a great group that they're not going to ever go down without a fight.
We continue plays of the week with the Penn Trafford boys, and the Warriors won their first section game this season Friday at Franklin Regional. They did so with nearly perfect execution in the second half. highlighted by a beautiful play from Ian Temple to Andrew Kessler, as detailed by myself and Mark Katarski. Under 4 minutes left in regulation, 16-point lead. No shot clock. Maybe PT does get a little bit more deliberate, but when they keep getting looks like that, Kessler's closing in on double digits. He's had a really nice second half, and what an attempt. But great stuff there from Penn Trafford to get that elusive first victory. It meant a little bit more to Coach Kelly as well. Doug Kelly was a longtime head coach at Franklin Regional, so a little bit of a homecoming victory for him. And we'll wrap up Plays of the Week with the Seton Hill men as we go to the college ranks. And the Griffins' winning streak was snapped against Cal U, but they showed plenty of fight, including in the final seconds of the first half when Jimmy Moon made his presence felt, as called by Jack and myself. Yeah, and really, I don't know if that was an intended 2-for-1, but they got it off too late, and now Seton Hill should get a final shot here.
Dylan out front, 10 to play and to shoot. Moon with 6. Yes! A 1-point lead now for Cal U. Halleck with 1. Fires! No! And we go into the break with a 1-point difference. Jimmy Moon from the stratosphere, and he pulls the Griffins within 1 of Cal U. Like I mentioned, Sean, all the way from the stratosphere, which after I said that, I wondered, is it stratosphere then the atmosphere or atmosphere then stratosphere? I don't know, but that was a deep three from none other than Jimmy Moon. Yeah, a lot of excitement at the McKenna Center. Seton Hill men creating that energy that has not been around for many, many years. Give a lot of credit to Ben Wilkins, the first-year head coach. That'll do it for Plays of the Week. We'll now shift our focus to the Team of the Week. We mentioned before, it's the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions boys. Jack, we have both seen this team. We've seen them with a dramatic victory against Sarah Catholic at home earlier in the season. One reason why they're our Team of the Week, they're on a 5-game winning streak, and they took care of business this past week, winning by 10 at Sarah Catholic, and then winning against a pretty talented Leechburg team. So they get 2 crucial section victories, and they have already redeemed their only loss against Riverview. This team's playing like, I don't know if maybe championship contender is a little premature, but they're playing like clearly the best team in what is a pretty competitive section right now. Yeah, they're definitely peaking at the right time of the season, and I don't even think that they've hit their peak. I think what has been so impressive about them, for me at least, is, and you and I have talked about it a lot, especially with it being a main theme for this team, is their 3-point shooting. We saw them early in the season, and we wondered, is that going to be kind of their kryptonite? Is that going to be something that comes back to bite them down the road? Because in the games that we saw them against Jeanette, as well as Sarah Catholic, they were very, very timid with the 3-pointer. However, they've been able to weather that storm. They've been able to kind of dance around that. And you and I mentioned it a lot. That's, again, a big part of basketball these days is the 3-point shot, extending defenses, stretching the floor some. But they've been able to figure it out in other ways. And again, I think that when you've got a player in Tyree Turner, who I think can get to the lane at any time he wants, and then a player in Franco Alvarez, who I personally think could be a matchup nightmare, because he can play outside of the paint, he can play down low, he's a great passer. I don't think people give Alvarez enough credit as a great passer and a great floor general as well. So this, like you said, Sean, championship might be premature. We don't want to jump the gun, but they're playing really good basketball, and they look frightening, to say the least, right now. Yeah, I think most people look at teams like Fort Cherry and say what they're doing in 2A. They would probably be ahead of GCC at this point. But really, that doesn't matter necessarily at this point. If you're Christian Highland, the head coach, you're just worried about taking care of business in terms of the regular season. Go into the postseason hot. They are hot, as we mentioned, 5-game winning streak, 8-1 in the section. You mentioned Turner. He had a triple-double recently. And triple-doubles are always, a little iffy at the high school level, because points, are pretty accurate. Rebounds and assists, those numbers can be fudged a little bit. But I believe in that triple-double game, he also had 0 turnovers. So I think that's just speaking to the control that he has over this type of game. And one issue that we saw earlier in the season, Jack, is they didn't get a lot off the bench. I think that's still going to be a question mark. They leaned so much on their starting 5, but a guy like Riley, who's been able to come off the bench and give them, at least in spurts, some offense. If they can get 2 or 3 guys off the bench to even just be scoring threats, they don't have to put up double digits. I think that could be the missing link for them. And certainly the perimeter shooting could ultimately be their downfall if they go ice cold in the game, but I think they figured out a way around that by and large now. Yeah, I mean, they're such a strong driving team that they're kind of able to work around that. But again, it's a good point you bring up about the reserves. And I think we really saw the coming out party for the reserves in that Jeanette game. GCC gets absolutely clobbered with foul trouble early on, very often. Go to the bench, and the bench is exactly what they needed in that game. And really, Sean, I look back at that game and I wonder, if the GCC reserves have the impact that they had in that game, does GCC win that game? I don't know. Maybe they would have won, maybe not in the way that they would have, that they did. But I think ultimately they're going to need to get that help from the 6th, 7th, and 8th players on this team, because if it's not a matter of guys not hitting shots or fatigue, it's like how we saw against Jeanette. It could be foul trouble that really starts to tighten things up on this roster. And now you're kind of wondering, okay, well, who am I going to put out on the floor? And that's where that next man mentality comes in. It's just going to have to be who is going to be that next man and who's going to be ready on that bench.
Yeah, and they've got some big games still upcoming. At Jeanette, that's always a big-time showdown. Now, one got feisty last time. I would expect that everyone's going to be geared up for that against the Clareton Bears, and then at Springdale to wrap up the section ledger. But congrats to our team of the week, the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions boys. We now look at the trivia question. First, we'll look at last week's trivia question, and I kind of had to preface this a little bit, but who is the active longest continuously tenured Westmoreland County boys basketball coach, aka who has been coaching currently at one spot the longest? And the answer may be a little surprising, but it's a guy that you and I have seen earlier this season, Greater Latrobe's Brad Wetzel, who looks like he's in his late 30s, 21 years on the sidelines of the Wildcats. Just an incredible job that he's done. Now, guys like Joe Salvino have been coaching longer, but remember, he went from Monessen to Bell Vernon. So that's not, continuously tenured at one school. Even Espo, I believe, actually started, Tom Esposito, the head coach of Derry, started earlier than Wetzel, but he took a break and then was coaching elsewhere before coming back to Derry area. So Brad Wetzel is the correct answer for the trivia question, 21 years on the sidelines. That turns our attention to this week's trivia question, and this one's a time-sensitive one. Heading into action today, January 30th, so not counting any games that take place on January 30th, which Westmoreland County girls team has the best scoring defense, aka which team is allowing the fewest points per game? You can guess and send your guess via Twitter. You can tweet it at WestmorelandSN and use the hashtag on the hardwood. Anyone who gets it correct, we will certainly shout you out. We will wrap up this edition of the Hardwood Podcast with a look ahead. And again, you're to the point now where every game seemingly has some playoff implications. Let's look at what's on the ledger on the boys' side. Tuesday, Mount Lebanon and Hempfield area, we will have that broadcast. We also mentioned GCC Jeanette. That's a big-time showdown. Other games on Tuesday, Norwin and Upper St. Clair, Franklin Regional, and Kiski area doing battle. That will be at Kiski. That's a big one, certainly. Bell Vernon against Uniontown area, Valley at Ligonier Valley, and then York against the first place Washington Little Prexies. Friday, Greater Latrobe at Franklin Regional, Laurel Highlands at Bell Vernon area, Derry area at Valley, Mount Pleasant at York, and Jeanette at Clareton. Highlight them. Certainly some good games mixed in there. And you look at Bell Vernon, Jack, they've got two big-time showdowns to prove that they should be in the title contention, or maybe that they're not quite there.
Yeah, this is test week right now, I think, for Bell Vernon, right? I mean, especially against Laurel Highlands, a team that they fell to earlier this season. Can they bounce back? Can they respond? But I'm really intrigued by this Mount Lebanon Hempfield game on Tuesday that we've got, because it's a little David versus Goliath battle, if you will. I mean, you got the first place Mount Lebanon Blue Devils. You've got second to last place Hempfield Spartans, penultimate, if you will. Could be a little bit of a fun matchup. Maybe Hempfield, like we said, plays spoiler.
Let's look at the girls' side. Monday, Butler at Norwin as the Knights look to get back on the winning track. Greensburg Salem at North Catholic. Deer Lakes at Mount Pleasant. Greensburg Central Catholic at Sarah Catholic. That should be a really, really good matchup. We had the broadcast the first time when those teams played at GCC. Of course, you can go back and watch that on archive. Tuesday, Franklin Regional at Kiski area. That will actually be a girls-boys doubleheader between the Panthers and the Cavs. Thursday, Norwin at Hempfield. That's always a good rivalry. Greater Latrobe at Albert Gallatin. Knock at Greensburg Salem. And Ligonier Valley at Burrow. Anything jump out on the girls' side to you, Jack?
Well, just always excited to see how, the Norwin Lady Knights bounce back from their struggles as of recently, especially on Thursday when they travel to Hempfield. Can they, get back into their winning ways, or do the struggles continue?
And then collegiately Wednesday, it's going to be a special night in Greensburg as Seton Hill hosts IUP for a women's men's doubleheader. The women's team will be celebrating the 100-year anniversary for women's basketball at Seton Hill, which is just mind-blowing. So I know head coach Mark Katarski is excited to see many dignitaries, former players come back for that one. Well, that's all I have on our docket, Jack. Anything final that you wanted to touch on before we put a bow on this episode of the Hardwood Podcast?
Just always great to be chatting some hoops with you, my friend.
Absolutely. I echo those sentiments. That'll do it for this week. Reminder, check out all our live broadcasts. Of course, they are archived as well on westmorelandsports.com. Each and every day, we've got great content up on the website. You want to check that out with the notebook on Monday, the Westmoreland alum Q&A, the recruiting roundup. We've got game recaps many times as well. So we've got plenty of great content there. And of course, each and every week, you need to check us out. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow all the social media accounts as well for Westmoreland Sports. But for now, we will say goodbye. For my colleague Jack Ridenour, Sean Meyers signing off. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you again next week as we continue right here, Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.